Hi everyone, I have spoken about my favourite audiobooks before, but it's been a while and I love audiobooks and many of you have been asking me for recommendations. So here we are again. I really love listening to audiobooks. I listened to them a lot when I was younger. I used to buy the cassette tapes that came in packs along with paperbacks. And I used to get audiobooks out of the library all the time as well. As many of you know, I spent loads of time in hospital as a kid. I had lots of surgeries on my hands, reconstructive surgery, which meant I wasn't always able to hold a book. So when I wasn't able to hold a book, I was listening to a book. And I love listening to books when I'm cooking. So I thought I would also put in this video a recipe for a coffee and walnut cake, because why not? I feel like at the moment we need lovely audiobooks and baking. So I'm gonna smush those two things together in this video. Actually, I'm just gonna put the cake on at the end, I think. So I'm gonna talk to you about some of my favorite audiobooks. I've probably spoken about some of these before, but in case you missed it the first time, I'll mention them again along with some new ones. So that at the moment, Mr. M and I are listening to an audiobook together before bed. We're listening to Call of the Weird by Louis Theroux, which I'm really enjoying. If you're new to audiobooks, finding one that's narrated by someone who you already know, like the voice of someone you already know, I think is a really good way to get your brain to pay attention to the words. Sometimes I'm asked, how do you pay attention to an audiobook? And I think it's just a case, as with anything, of practice. And I think having a voice you recognize really helps. So for instance, this is not one of my recommendations because Charles Dickens is sadly not a favorite of mine, but if he's a favorite of yours, check out the Richard Armitage narrated versions of Charles Dickens, because I mean, Richard Armitage, need I say any more? So we're currently listening to the Louis Theroux audiobook Call of the Weird, which is a follow-up to his TV show, and I'm really enjoying it. And then I am listening to Hometown Tales Glasgow, which is a series that's done by a publisher where they get an established author to write, I think it's 15,000 words about their hometown and the memories associated with their hometown. And then they get an up-and-coming writer to write about their hometown too, and then they put them together in one book. So I'm listening to Kirsty's book, and the writer who's alongside her is Paul McQuaid, but I haven't listened to his section yet. Her section is beautiful. She is a friend of mine, so I'm biased, but her voice is amazing, and she's talking about losing her father and growing up and being obsessed with fairy tales. This is the thing with audiobooks. Sometimes you can't remember exact quotes. I should have written it down, but she said something along the lines of, and I'm sorry to misquote you, Kirsty, I turned my father into a story. It's the only version of him I was allowed to keep. And it's a really heartbreaking, warm and lovely, lovely audiobook. So those are the two that I'm listening to at the moment. As for recommendations, my favorite, as I've spoken about lots, is the Frida Klein series by Nikki French, which is 8 books long. So, you know, that's a lot to lose yourself in. It's about a psychotherapist called Frida Klein who gets caught up in all of these police cases. It's a little bit ridiculous. I didn't believe everything that happened in it, but the characters are wonderful, and you follow not just her, but a group of her friends. Each book is its individual story, but then there is a story that runs throughout the 8 books as well. The first one is called Blue Monday. If you would like some fast crime, well, actually it's not that fast. If you would like some faster than literary fiction, but slow for crime, then I recommend listening to that. And that is narrated by Beth Chalmers. I would also recommend, particularly now, The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. She is fantastic. I love being a patron of hers at any time of the year, but at the moment, her Patreon is just like a warm hug, and I think it's brilliant. This book is all about reaching out to people, establishing connections. It's about the music industry. It's about so many different things, but it really is about community in the creative industries. And if you do anything creative, then I would really recommend checking it out. Listen to her TED Talk first to see if you would like to listen or read the entire book, because the book is an extension of that TED Talk. I'd also recommend The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow, and this is narrated by Kirsty Atherton. I think that's right. The Other Bennett Sister is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but told from the point of view of Mary, so the middle sister. The first third of the book is set during the time of Pride and Prejudice. The rest is set afterwards, and we follow her going to Charlotte's house, going to Lizzie and Darcy's house, and all of the characters, as I've said before, feel so true to the original book whilst also stepping outside of the perimeters that they were allowed to have in the original book. The voice of Mrs. Bennet sounds exactly like Alison Steadman from the BBC, Pride and Prejudice. It is wonderful. It's definitely something to lose yourself in. I would recommend My Name is Leon by Kit de Wall, and this is narrated by Lenny Henry. It's about a young boy called Leon who is taken into foster care. His brother is taken away from him because his brother is white and he is mixed race, and they think that if they split both of the children up, then his white brother will have a greater chance of being adopted. Kit wrote this story because she has worked in adoption, and it is just... honestly, it will make you cry so much, but it will also stick your heart back together with sellotape. If you like Rachel Joyce, if you like Caris Bray, I think you would really love this. And Lenny Henry's narration adds a whole new layer to the story itself. I've listened to all of the books by Sarah Waters that I have read on audio, and my favourite book, I think, is Tipping the Velvet, but my favourite audio narration of one of her books, may sound strange to make the distinction between the two, is The Little Stranger, which is narrated by Simon Vance. I think that that audiobook really lends itself to being an audiobook because it's so atmospheric, it's slow, it's creepy, it's set in an old house, there's a ghostly element. One of you asked me if I would make a video actually specifically recommending books that are set around creepy houses or where houses are a big thing in the story, and I would like to do that, so I will do that at some point soon. Two dystopias that I would recommend re-listening to, or rereading, re-listening to you as well, but rereading via audio, if you would like to, is The Handmaid's Tale and Never Let Me Go. At the moment, I wouldn't blame you if you said that you weren't really keen on listening to dystopia. I can't say it's a genre that I've been reaching for myself, but these two audiobook narrations are amazing. The Handmaid's Tale version that I have is narrated by Elizabeth Moss, who's in the TV show of The Handmaid's Tale, and I can't remember the narrator of Never Let Me Go, but I'll insert their name here, and that book is by Kazu Ishiguro. It remains one of my favourite books of all time, and it's one of those books that you can't really talk about without ruining it, because it hinges on something that if I talked about it would just spoil the whole thing. So just trust me and either read that book or listen to it. It's brilliant. I would also recommend listening to the audiobook of Educated by Tara Westover, which is a memoir. She had a very difficult childhood growing up with a father who was very suspicious of the government, wouldn't let any of his children go to school, and mistreated them quite badly. And she's talking about her education, not just as in her education involving school, but her education of life and learning about how her life was so different to everybody else's around her. I also recommend the audiobook of Lanny. I would say I would read it in physical form first, because the way that the text is laid out on the page is very experimental. It's set out like a script, and I think it really demands close attention to the page. But I enjoyed revisiting it via audiobook because it is laid out like a script. I think if I had just listened to it without reading it, I might have found the audio slightly confusing because it is so disjointed. But paired together with the text, I just think it's a wonderful way to listen and revisit. I also want to recommend The Butcher's Hook, which I definitely recommended in my last audiobook favourites video. It is about a young girl called Anne Jacob, and she's trying to get her own back on everyone who has wronged her, and it gets quite bloody. It's set in the 1700s in London, and she's fallen in love with the butcher's son. I also wanted to recommend just some books that I love listening to when I was younger, and I'm going to whiz through these. I really love still revisiting Roald Dahl audiobooks, especially The Witches. I love listening to Mark Haddon's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. As I talked about in a video a few weeks ago, I love revisiting the Louise Renison, Georgia Nicholson books, which are outrageous. The Jacqueline Wilson Girls in Love series I also love revisiting, along with When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr. And also, I had to mention, obviously, Harry Potter narrated by Stephen Fry. I'm often listening to one of those. I normally have one on the go because They're very, very comforting. And finally, a book that I loved listening to when I was younger was called Goggle Eyes by Anne Fine, which is about a teenage girl whose mother has recently got a new boyfriend, and she's talking about their family dynamic, but also her fear of nuclear war, because it's set in the 1980s. Now, should we go and make some cake? Let's make some cake. I have had some success with this cake before. It's always tasted delicious, but sometimes it hasn't risen as much as I would like it to. So let's see today if it's going to be a fail or a success. Fingers crossed. And I'll link the recipe in the description box down below. First, you want to preheat your oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 160 degrees if it's a fan oven, which is gas mark 4. You want to blend together 50 grams of walnut pieces, 225 grams of caster sugar. And then once you've blended that, cream that together with 225 grams of soft, unsalted butter. To add to that, you want to put in 4 teaspoons of espresso powder. I just use ground coffee though, cafetiere coffee, which works absolutely fine. 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda, 4 large eggs, 2 tablespoons of milk, and 200 grams of plain flour. Butter 2 20cm cake tins, and then split the mixture evenly between those and put them in the oven for 25 minutes. Once they're cooked, make sure they are absolutely and completely cold. You can put them in the fridge if you want to, you can absolutely do that. I think this is where I often fall down because I get too excited and I want to put the icing on. Even I think it's cold and it's ready, and it's just not. Just leave it a bit longer and it will be worth it. So whilst that's chilling, you want to mix together 350 grams of icing sugar with 175 grams of unsalted butter and 2.5 teaspoons of coffee. So make coffee and put that liquid in. And then put that mixture in the fridge as well so that the buttercream can solidify a bit. Once everything is cool, assemble it and then decorate it with walnut pieces, and it is delicious. I think this is my favorite cake ever. Highly recommend. Let me know if you try it yourself. Let me know if you have any baking, I was gonna say requests. If you have any requests for things to go in videos, yes, let me know that. But also let me know if you have any recommendations for specific cake recipes or things that you love. Let me know what your favorite audiobooks are as well in a comment down below, and I will see you guys on Thursday for a new video. Lots of love. Bye.